There we go. Kathy Sue, Chris Westrop, Parkland, or Park Insurance. Thanks for joining me.
Our
Thank you,
pleasure.
Patrick.
My pleasure.
So we got the R4 conference coming up. You guys are going to be there. But in the meantime, we want to open up the conversation about insurance, why insurance is so darn important, and bring some value to our listeners today as we do this Facebook Live. And you know something, as investors, we have to look at all sorts of risk mitigation. And, you know, Chris, why don't we start with you? You know, when we look at loss prevention for investors, you know, do you have a definition for that? What does it really mean, loss prevention?
Well, what it is, it's the actions that any individual can do on their end to reduce their exposure to the possibility of a loss, protecting your stuff. So that's through buying insurance is the biggest and most common one. The other one is just taking care of your stuff, making sure that you're doing what you can to stop something bad from happening in the first place. Insurance will get you when the bad stuff happens, most of the time, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully.
But it's stopping that bad stuff from happening to begin with.
Well, you know, it's interesting that, you know, Park Insurance has been part of the RAIN community and a trusted partner for many, many years now, into the point where we've actually defined a specific product and coverage for RAIN members and real estate investors. That's awesome. Kathy, when you're looking and, you know, when you're getting calls about a claim, are there common, I'm going to say them, I don't want to call them mistakes, but are there common things that our people aren't, or investors aren't paying attention to, or that they should know in terms of, you know, what are the things that they step over when they're asking for insurance? What questions aren't they asking sometimes?
I think when you look at the type of claims that comes in to us, by far water damage and sewer backup are two of your most common causes of loss. And if we really look at that carefully, there's actually a lot of things that investors can do in order to prevent a sewer backup loss from happening in the first place. And that could be as simple as installing sewer backup valve protectors, or regularly checking on the sump pumps that you have at the property if you have one. Maintenance and ongoing service goes a long way, because when sewer backup do occur, as an example, some investors may find that there's a sub-limit on their policy, which restricts the payout of the sewer backup claim to maybe $50,000 or $25,000. And in simple terms, it just means that insurance company will stop paying after they reach that amount, which means anything that you need to repair above that is your financial loss, right? And of course, dealing with a claim can be stressful for investors as well as the tenant. So there are a lot of ways to prevent water damage and sewer backup, like with water, checking on the appliances, making sure that the hose are replaced, and things like that can go a long way.
Well, I guess on some of these older properties too. Now, this is an interesting conversation when it comes to water. I guess water's really got to be one of the, or if not the biggest issue. You know, Kathy, you mentioned, you know, sewer backup. That's an issue. Where I see investors often get confused around insurance, Chris, is that there's surface water coming into, let's say, your basement, or there's sewer backup or a pipe burst. And there's different coverages or no coverage. Can you break that down a little bit so that investors, you know, understand maybe some of the more nuanced questions that they should be getting clear on or asking?
Absolutely. So sewer backup is exactly what it says. That's backing up of sewers. Now that can come through your floor drain in your basement. It could be through your toilet, your bathtub, your sink, whatever it backs up. So that's any type of sewer type backup. The other one, the overland water, is what we call flood.
Yep.
So that is that's when you have a major storm, Calgary, when we had the flooding back in, what was that, 2000?
Wasn't that long ago, but anyways, so major flooding, yeah.
Yeah. And then there's also overland water, which is excessive water from a rainstorm coming in through either a door, a window, or something along those lines. The thing to bear in mind about that is, and this is something for people in the prairie regions to start thinking about, is when the snowpack starts to melt, if it starts seeping through your foundations, that's not covered, unfortunately. So any seepage through your foundation isn't covered. And then the last one is the obvious water damage, ruptured pipe. And this can be an overflowing sink. So rather than the pipe rupturing or sewage coming up, it's just somebody put the plug in the sink, let it overflow.
So then those are questions that it's not a given that these things are covered. I guess this is my point around it all, is that investors need to be having conversations with, investor focused insurance providers like yourselves, so that you're making sure you're getting the right coverage and that you know exactly what is or what isn't covered. So, overland, you're going to say, well, sometimes some of it may be covered, but ultimately we have to look at where the water's coming through, which means, back to loss prevention, are your eaves big enough? Are they, draining away from the house? Have you got the right grade from the house into the yard? These are all things to help loss prevention, so that, that you're not dealing with an insurance claim or expecting an insurance claim that actually isn't going to come to fruition, and you're going to find yourself writing the check.
Exactly. And again, like Kathy mentioned, one of the big things to check is any limitations on the amount of insurance for that. A lot of companies do have supplements for sewer backup and water damage.
So there's another part of this conversation that we've talked about over the many years that we've had these conversations, and that is about rental loss. If somebody floods, we'll use that as an example. There's a flood, legitimate flood, it's covered for whatever reason, burst pipe, whatever, but what happens in this case? So you got two issues I see, and this is what I think is an important question to ask, which is, okay, I'm covered for the rent that I'm not receiving while they rebuild, and that could be 3 months, 6 months. That's a question to ask. How long are you covered for? But what happens with my tenants? If I have tenants in there and there's a flood, it's a pipe damage, whatever happens, it's a covered incident. Does it pay for my tenants having to move out and having to move into a hotel, for example?
That, unfortunately, is why your tenants need to have their insurance.
See, these are the nuances, right? This is that's why I brought the question up, but this is perfect. So thanks, Chris.
Yeah. So never assume that your policy is going to help your tenant. Your policy is there for your protection. It's not there to protect the tenant. That's one of the reasons why it's very important for your tenant to have insurance, because you're not paying for them to stay in a hotel if there's any damage to your property.
If there's any property damage that belongs to the tenant, your policy won't respond to cover their contents, and that's a big key. Could impact their personal belongings.
So, we often say to investors is that, you make sure that your tenants provide you a certificate of insurance, so that at least you've come to that agreement and that that they've got insurance for those incidents should they come to fruition. Now, only because this recently came up, we're seeing a lot of short-term rentals, Airbnb, and there's some really nice units out there. And somebody was having a discussion about, and I don't remember what the issue was exactly, doesn't matter, but they had a hot tub on the property and the hot tub froze or something happened and there was damage to that particular hot tub. Does insurance cover that kind of damage, to that external hot tub, or does it have to be included in, whatever, when you're talking and looking at the insurance, does it have to be included as an additional rider? What is that particular incident? How does that look?
I'm going to defer to Kathy, because honestly, I don't know about hot tubs, and I have one. What I'm going to say is that damage to the hot tub, if it's on the outside of the building from freezing, I'm going to think that's not going to be covered, simply because it's a distinct possibility based on the fact that it is outside. not going to look at it now because my hot tub's outside. So
You better get on
the
that,
heater
Chris.
fails, I want to check. I want to know if I've got coverage for it, but I don't believe there is anything for anything.
Kathy, do you know the answer to that question? Do you know any?
I think
details?
I think I'm with Chris on this one. It really depends on the cause of loss. So if the hot tub is in a different scenario, wiped out in a forest fire, it would be covered because it's a property outside that's you got insurance for, and it burned down. But in this case, it's a specific unit itself that was damaged by the freezing, and generally speaking, the unit itself that's damaged may or may not be covered. But the resulting damages, that's why it's up to the policy. You have to really look at the policy.
These are the things that are happening, right? These are discussions that investors need to have with their insurance provider so that they're not making assumptions and they understand what's going on. So there's a lot of insurance changes coming. The R4 conference is going to be coming up. You're going to be speaking a lot about insurance at the R4 conference, if I'm not mistaken. And part of what you're talking about is some of the changes that are coming through the insurance, because it's been really tough the past 4 or 5 years. Are we getting any pressure relief, Kathy or Chris? I don't know who wants to take this question on.
I'm going to say the biggest pressure relief, unfortunately, was in Turkey. And that is going to have a big impact on what's happening in insurance. We've talked about in the past that insurance is really, truly a global industry.
Yeah.
So what happens in Turkey is going to impact everybody in the world at some point in the future. Now, I saw something about the Turkish government going after building contractors for poor workmen and stuff like that. That's also going to help bring in insurance because there's going to be liability claims there. The fact is that with global climate change, we're seeing more and more weather-related claims, and they're having more and more impact on society. And anytime there's a major thunderstorm, an atmospheric river, rain bomb, whatever they're calling it, it's impacting things. It's causing claims, and it's not going to do anything good for insurance.
Got it. Okay. Well, listen, folks, if you're listening to this and you really want to get a lot more knowledge on what you need for insurance, particularly as an investor, come out to the R4 conference. Chris and Kathy will be there to talk to you and get discussion going on your coverage. Make sure you're covered. If you're part of the RAIN community and a RAIN member, then you're going to get some really cool coverage and very cost sensitive in that regard. But the key is to get coverage that you need as an investor. Kathy and Chris, I want to say thanks for joining me today.
You're very welcome. As always, it was my pleasure.
Thanks, guys.
Same. Thank you.